evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Scott. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's staying healthy. Today's guest is pretty special to me. It's a band that I've seen several times over the past half dozen years or so. They always rock out every time I see them. I would like to welcome Eddie Spaghetti, bass player and singer from the band Supersuckers. What's going on, Eddie?
How are you, brother? Good to talk to you.
Well, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. I've been a big fan here for a while. I was introduced to you guys about, like I said, 6-7 years ago, and been a fan ever since. I've seen you guys play here up around Chicago, like at Reggie's or the Brower House. Fantastic shows. Always a good time.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it. You must be a person of impeccable taste.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we always ask the same first question every time we have a first-time guest on the program, and that is the essence of the show. Just like every rock song has a hook that pulls you in, that sucks you in, every rock fan has a moment, whether it's a band, a performance, an album, or a song that hooked them on rock and roll. What was it for you?
For me, it was, this will date me quite a bit, but I think I was about, 12 years old, 11 years old, and was My Sharona by the Knack. The fucking greatest song of all time. I still love that song. I'm still trying to write my version of My Sharona.
It's a great song. Pretty popular back in the early 80s.
Oh, my God, yeah. You could not get away from them. The Knack was everywhere. And, it was a great time for music in general. I still listen to a lot of music from the late 70s, early 80s. I feel like, it was kind of a golden age to grow up in that time. And the way you used to have to get music, I used to have a paper route. I used to have to save up my money and ride my bike over to Walgreens and buy a record and hope the record made it home and, sit there on my bed and stare at the album cover while I play the record. It was a whole experience, which, you don't have anymore. And, yeah, I guess it's a shame, but, there is some sort of, there's something to be said for having instant access to every song in the world on your phone, so, it's a whole different kind of experience.
Yeah, I've talked about that a lot on this podcast, about how the lack of physical connection with music has really hurt rock and roll, probably more so than any other genre, because rock music relied so much on that physical experience. I just said on one of the last programs I just did, no one ever talks about a great Madonna album cover or a Michael Jackson album cover. But, you talk about Iron Maiden or Motorhead or Pink Floyd or Zeppelin or wherever. I mean, those album covers you got lost in. And, it was part of the experience, or reading the liner notes. Plus, when you bought a record, you bought one album, and that was good for you for like 6-8 weeks, sometimes, a few months, because you just absorb it over time, and then you go buy another one. I had a paper route too, where I'd save my money. But yeah, it's completely different. Now it's click, download, listen, and you could spend $100 on songs that maybe you'll skip over halfway through, but it's a completely different vibe right now.
Right, or you don't have to spend a dime and hear anything you want, music has become something that people almost expect to get for free. And I know it's been very detrimental to my band, because it's not like we ever sold a lot of records to begin with, and now we don't sell any, so that, it makes music, basically it's a loss leader to a live show, which is, now currently non-existent as well. So, I don't know what we're supposed to do. It's a whole different world right now.
Yes, it is, and we'll certainly get into that and how it's affecting Supersuckers. But to continue on with your influence, was there an album or song or performer that made you want to pick up the bass, made you want to be in a band?
Well, I never really wanted to play the bass. I sort of fell into playing the bass by accident, and it was because there was no bass players in any of the local bands. All the bands in the neighborhood, all the guys, they weren't really bands. They were just groups of kids getting together and playing. No one had a bass player. Everyone said, yeah, we need a bass player. We need a bass player. I didn't even know what the bass sounded like when I agreed to be the bass player for a band. I heard AC/DC, and I was hoping that it was, the guitar lick. I was hoping, I hope that's the bass. That's what I want to be doing. But, I found out quickly the bass is like the unsung hero of the band, and it's really the instrument that's playing the songs. And it wasn't until I got into playing the bass that I found heroes like Phil Lynott and Lemmy and even Dee Dee Ramone. And there's this guy from this, there was a hard rock band from the 80s called Kix.
Oh, yeah.
And they had this bass player, his name was Donnie Purnell, and he wrote all the songs, and he was the bass player, and he played a Les Paul bass. And I just thought he was the coolest. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be like the mastermind behind the scenes, making up all the songs, playing the bass, not getting any credit, but, knowing that I was secretly responsible for all this rock and roll that everybody was hearing.
And then it led to wanting to be in a band and wanting it to perform. Who influenced you on that?
Oh, I don't know really. It was just something that was inherently in me, I think. When I was a kid, I got really into a lot of new wave music, like Blondie and the Knack and Cars. And I think the first record I ever bought was a Pat Benatar record. And so I kind of liked that sort of music first. And then I started listening to a bunch of disco and, kind of like the Commodores and Parliament and weird stuff like that. I think mainly because my parents did. And then when I got into high school, I started to get into like Van Halen. I was super into Van Halen. And I think that's probably the band that made me want to be a performer.
Yeah, Van Halen was so larger than life. When you think back.
Yeah, everything they did was huge.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing Van Halen 1 for the very first time at the house and putting the headphones on so my mother wouldn't hear it. I had like this deep-rooted sense that my mother's probably not going to like this, so I should put the headphones on. And then,
right.
Yeah, and then I saw them perform on television at the U.S. Festival in '83, and it was just like, wow, who is this band is just incredible. Like I said, it was just larger than life. It was just this huge, whether it was David Lee Roth or whether it was, Eddie Van Halen and the stage show, and it was just they were an experience. We talk about the experience of, yesterday. If any band is defined by an experience, you could say Kiss and you could say some other bands, but Van Halen was really where it was in the 80s.
Yeah, you would think I'd be really into Kiss, but I never really thought Kiss was that great for some reason. I thought they were kind of pretenders. I don't know why I thought that, but now I totally see I was right. But I thought they were just kind of bullshit, but I thought Van Halen was totally the real deal. When I first heard Eruption for the first time, I think the album was old by the time I heard Van Halen. They had already had So Many Children First was out when I first heard Van Halen. I was kind of a late comer to that whole hard rock scene. I was a late comer to AC/DC for sure, and they're now probably my favorite band of all time. I didn't hear them until Back in Black came out. I didn't even know there was a whole Bon Scott era until much later in the game.
Yeah, similar experience for myself and Van Halen. I was like 7 years old in 1982 when I listened to Van Halen 1, like I said, on the record player in my parents' living room. And, the album obviously had been out for a while, and Fair Warning and I think Women and Children First had come out. And so it was this huge, huge experience for me. And then, of course, seeing him on, the U.S. Festival just sealed the deal. But, yeah, similar, where I was always aware of Kiss growing up because of all the toys and the Halloween masks and seeing them on People magazine. So I was always aware of them before I heard them. Whereas Van Halen, I had never heard them, and then I just heard people talking about them, like my older brother and his friends, and that's why I wanted to listen to the record so bad, and I was on my way.
Yeah, it was a great experience for me as a kid. And now still I listen to Van Halen through, nostalgic filter ears, I suppose, and I still think they sound great. Those records still sound really good to me, and the production still sounds relevant. Everything sounds like it's supposed to me. It sounds like rock and roll.
Absolutely. It sounds like the party that rock and roll is all about.
Exactly.
You guys have had a lot of records over the last couple of decades, probably more so, than probably more time than I'm giving you credit for. But one thing I've always noticed is that you do have such a wide variety of influences. Whether it's when you do the country albums or when you do the rock albums, where does all that come from? I mean, does that come from you being the quote unquote mastermind, or does that come from the other guys in the band? How does that all work out?
Well, I like to think it comes from me being the mastermind. I mean, I'm the principal songwriter, and most of the songs in all of the Supersuckers canon were started in my brain. And I'm kind of at a loss to explain how I've been able to still remain creatively on fire. I feel like the last few records I've made are the best ones I've ever made. And, that's a rare thing. Bands usually put out their best albums. Their first couple albums are their best, and they usually peter out after a couple records and, lose the fire in the belly, which I've never lost. And I guess it's probably because I've never really had any sort of large scale success. And I feel like, we deserve, I feel like we're really the greatest rock and roll band in the world. And I'm not afraid to say it, so I don't know exactly where it comes from, but I'm glad it still comes. I think it's just a matter of, for me, it's just a matter of keeping my antenna up and, just keeping an ear open for something that's going to be a great song title.
When you are writing music, where do you pull from your influences? Does it just come, does the creative process just keep flowing for you, or do you have to do things? I mean, imagine right now when you're not doing what you would normally be doing, it's probably a little bit more difficult to be creative. Am I wrong on that, or what's the process for you?
Yeah, it's a challenge for me right now because usually what we do is we make up new songs, after we're tired of the last batch of songs we just made up. And that comes from, going on tour and playing the new material until you're bored of it. And then you start to search out the next wave of music that you're going to, start working on. But that process got cut off right as it was beginning for us because of this whole pandemic thing. So now I'm kind of, in this limbo stage where I've got to start making up new music. I haven't tired of the last batch of songs that we just made yet. And, I still would like to go out and play those songs and can't. So it's a weird thing for me right now for sure. I did just record a brand new song that will come out, probably at the end of this month, I suppose. And it's kind of like a timely number called Shit Fucked.
I imagine touring, as much as you guys do, allows you to keep that creative flow happening, because you're experiencing different things each day versus now you're predominantly at home experiencing the same things each day. So I imagine that also plays into the creative process.
Right. I think that's really enabled me to remain creatively viable through all these years is the fact that we're like sharks. We got to keep moving to survive. So, that movement creates different experiences, which creates different, memories, which, the whole thing feeds itself that way. And now I feel like more like a normal, regular guy, like the guy who has to go to work every day and does the same thing every day. And, not that I'm going to work, but, I'm going to have to before too long if things don't change soon.
Yeah, it's really, big question mark is, what's going to happen in the future and what bands are going to have to do.
They're talking about drive-up concerts. Our fan base isn't that big to where that would really be a viable option for us. We need an environment where people aren't afraid to get up next to each other and get all sweaty and, get covered in spit and get scratched and, clawed at. And, that's where the magic happens for a band like us, in the small little clubs with too many people in them.
Absolutely. Seeing you guys live, the live experience of the Supersuckers, this music really does come alive than in the albums. I will say, also that the music that you guys record on the albums, because I'm still a physical CD guy, right? I still buy the physical copy. I don't download anything or stream anything. The only time I stream something is if I'm like at the gym or something like that and I want to, work out and listen to some songs. But I'm always buying the physical copy of the music, whether I'm streaming it or not. I will say, though, that the experience, like I just said, is something that people should take part in because it is a good time. It's loud. It's obnoxious. It's a throwback to what rock and roll once was. Do you guys keep that in the front the way you guys should be, or is that just something that naturally comes out?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we are conscious of. And we just do it like we've always done it, like we think it needs to be done. And I guess it kind of makes us a relic in a way, like what we do, I suppose, is basically kind of turned into jazz music. It's for older people and fewer people and less people all the time. And that's it's unfortunate that kids don't like what we're doing because I still feel like a kid, I still channeling the inner 18-year-old Eddie and trying to make up, primitive, dumb rock. The dumber the music is, the more I tend to like it. I have written a bunch of songs that have meaning behind them and are about real things that happen to me. But the ones that I've made up that are really kind of about nothing are the ones that are still and really enjoy playing.
And I imagine too, when you are creating music, you are trying to connect with the fans of the Supersuckers. You're whether it's the country stuff that you guys do or the rock stuff that you do, and that's something that you got to feed into, right? You got to keep feeding the well so the Supersucker fans keep coming back.
Right, exactly. And anytime I've ignored that has been a bad moment for me. Anytime I thought, well, screw the fans, we're going to do what we want. There is part of us that continues to do that, but at the same time, it's not like the fans are there to hear me sing the notes. They're usually there to hear what I'm singing about or the words that I've written. That's where I am able to connect with the people who enjoy what we do.
When you're talking about the current state of rock music, and I've talked about this many times on the podcast, about the relevancy that it is today, connecting with the younger generation, I've always thought one of the biggest reasons, not the only reason, but one of the biggest reasons is the lack of rock stars in rock music. We talked about David Lee Roth. We talked about Kiss, even though, there's a difference of opinion on that band. But there's no larger-than-life character that connects with the youth of today. I just had a conversation with my son, who's 15, and I said to him, have you seen The Dirt by Motley Crue? He's like, oh, yeah. And I go, do your friends know about Motley Crue now? And he's like, oh, yeah. He's like, we're totally into them. And it's because of that outlaw image. It's because of that wild and craziness that I think a lot of people right now are afraid to alienate part of their fans or afraid to be controversial. When you see hip-hop artists embrace it, and that's why I think hip-hop connects more with the youth of today, whereas rock, people are playing it too safe.
For sure. I mean, who do we have? We have Dave Grohl, Eddie Vedder. I mean, these are the rock stars of today, I suppose. And, these are humble, nice guys. Nobody's out there being an asshole in rock and roll anymore. And if anybody is, it's just it's looked at as kind of repulsive for some reason. And yeah, it's a conundrum.
It's weird that rock music has taken that path when, like I just said, hip hop embraces it. They're not afraid to be controversial. And that's why when you hear younger kids and the younger generation listen to hip hop, it's because of that controversy. It's because of that, showing off the bling or whatever they call it. Whereas rock music, like you said, the rock stars are humble now. There's more of a conscious effort to kind of be right in the middle. And that's what rock and roll has never been about. It's never been about being down the middle. It's about, like you said, being an asshole, being controversial. I think back of the days of Axl Rose, or I think back of the days of listening to interviews with David Lee Roth and having my parents shout at me to turn that jerk off. But that's right. That's what made me want to listen to it more.
Yeah. And now, my kid, I have a 19-year-old kid who's finally started listening to music that I don't like, that I don't get at all. and it doesn't make me mad. In fact, it makes me, I feel like finally he's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing, listening to music that his parents don't understand. And that is so right. I don't understand this new hip hop, and I like rap music. I love Ice Cube. I like rap music from the early '90s. I love NWA and Public Enemy, and I have a real strong affinity for that music. But this new rap music, I don't even know if I would call it rap. It's just confusing. The beats make me blink, and everything just sounds like racket to me. And I really truly hate it, and I just want it to be turned off the minute it's on. But I'm glad that it's there. I guess I'm glad that kids have this new music that I don't understand, because that's the way it's supposed to happen.
You guys have the new album, Play That Rock and Roll, out, released this past February. You guys had to cancel the European tour. We touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the episode about what it means for Supersuckers and a lot of bands that are out there right now. What was the plan for 2020, and do you guys have a plan once things open up, or is it just kind of a wait-and-see approach?
Well, the plan was to just tour our asses off all year long and fuel up, and while we do that, make up new songs and just do it again. The cycle just kind of never ends for us. We don't ever plan on having a hit song, so we know that it's just going to be put the record out and go slug it out in the clubs and make the money at the merch table. But now the current plan is we still have some shows on the books for June in the States, but I'm pretty sure those are going to be squashed any minute now. And the next viable batch of shows that we have to go do is in Europe in November. We're supposed to go back and do all these rescheduled dates that we had to cancel, plus a whole bunch more. And, we'll see what it looks like in November, but I'm not too hopeful for that now either. It just looks like it's going to be a while. And even when we are able to come back, what's that going to look like? Are people going to be willing to go into these clubs with each other anymore? And, I don't know. I could be staring down the barrel of the end of the road here.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, when you think about the confidence the fan has into going, to a show without a vaccine or without a treatment available for COVID-19, there's a lot of unknown. There's just a lot of who knows what's going to happen. Plus, you have the small clubs that are struggling to survive. Are they going to be able to make this through? And if they don't, or if a lot of them don't, where are the bands like Supersuckers going to play that rely on those small clubs to get their music
exactly.
out? So there's a lot of questions that are out there, a lot of unfortunate questions. I hope a lot of bands like Supersuckers maintain and keep pushing forward, but it's got to be a difficult choice.
Yeah, it is. And, I want to do the smart thing. I don't want to force people to have to come see us that don't want to. But, I also, need to somehow figure out a way to make a living. And right now I'm currently doing these stories behind the song on my Instagram and my Facebook, and counting on people to tip me for this process. But, I'm going to run out of songs to tell stories about pretty soon. Start basically being a cover band before too long. It's just the creative process is going to mean something else. I have a feeling. People now are so used to getting music for free. It's hard to monetize it, but that's going to have to change. Because I'm always going to make up songs. I know that for a fact. And I'm going to have to, find a way to monetize it.
Did you ever think it was going to go on like this? I mean, I remember when this first came out, people were thinking, it'll be gone in a few weeks, be gone 30 days, and we'll get back to normal. It's got to be crushing to know that it just keeps going and keeps going.
Yeah, I had no idea it was going to be this serious. But when we were in Europe, as it was happening and all the borders were starting to close, I felt the weight of it full force, because we were out there in the trenches. We were about to go into Italy literally days before it broke out there. And, when those shows got canceled, things started getting real for us real quick. And, I don't know if I really thought it was going to go on this long, but I know until there's a vaccine and everybody's got access to it, life is going to be different.
When you think about the new album that you just released and you talk about how you feel the music that you guys are doing or playing is better than ever, and I tend to agree with you, whether it's this album or the album Suck It that was before that, and the last few records even before, I feel like there's been, a uptick in the Supersuckers music. When you're putting out when you're putting out quality stuff like this and you're unable to play it, how do you manage the frustration and how do you stay positive?
Well, you can't blame anybody for it. There's no clear cut bad guy here. So it's just just some bullshit that happened, and you just kind of gotta learn how to deal with it, I guess. I have a great family and I have a lot of good stuff around me. So as long as that stuff is intact, I guess it's not so bad. But the prospect of me going out and finding employment, that just seems so far-fetched for me. My resume has like a 30-year gap in it. And before that, the most skilled labor I did was put camper shells on the back of trucks, So, I don't want to go back to that, but that's what I'm looking at. It's an ugly prospect.
It's also a question, too. I know you've had some health issues over the past few years, and you've overcome those, and that's got to be on the back of your mind, too, of playing shows, knowing that you can be more affected because of that.
Yeah, and that's given me a real gratitude for life in general, to know that I had, a grave illness and was able to overcome it. It's given me a perspective that a lot of people don't have. And, I'm grateful for it, not for the fact that I had cancer, but, I'm grateful that I survived it. And now I have this sort of, attitude about life that is, a little more positive than it used to be.
It's not so much, well, it is. It's kind of equal in certain parts that, the fans are going to lack confidence to maybe come back to a show, but it's also the musicians that are up on stage. That are older, that are, approaching 50, in their 50s, approaching 60, that are older, and this disease affects older people. It affects people that have had issues with their immune system. I imagine, the last thing you want to do is sing into a mic that 12 people have touched that day and, see people coughing or sneezing in the crowd because, who knows how that could affect you.
Right, yeah. I used to be the least germophobic guy in the world, You're right, singing into a microphone that, who knows who had it up their ass the night before or whatever. And, now, of course, I have my own microphone and I have for years, but still, I leave it behind and it gets lost. And the next night I have to use the public mic again. And, it's disgusting. And I'm shaking people's hands at the merch booth and, putting my arm around dudes and taking pictures and just being, careless. And even though I did have cancer, I never get sick. I can't remember the last cold I had. I haven't been sick in at least a decade. So, I feel like my immune system is as strong as anybody's. But, that said, now you're thinking about things completely different. So, yeah, I don't know what the future is going to look like for us, a shitty rock and roll band like us who does our business in the dirty shitholes of the world. I just, I'm hopeful that things will go back to normal at some point, but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, I hope so too. My fingers are crossed for bands like you guys, bands like the Supersuckers, bands, new bands that are coming up, because I do believe that there was a swell of great music, great rock music coming out over the past few years. And I do believe that there was momentum going into this year. I've talked to so many bands about what their plans were for 2020. And, like you said, everyone's in the same boat. No one knows. Everybody had to cancel everything. Everybody was really proud of the music that they were putting out. And it's just kind of like the unknown. What's going to happen next? We don't know. I know there's some proposed legislation to help out musicians, to help out the small clubs that are, struggling right now. Hopefully that goes through, but, we don't know. We don't know what people are going to start thinking about. And, do they allocate money to the clubs? Do they allocate money to something else that they may feel is more important? But the bottom line is these clubs affect a lot of people. It affects, the people that work there. It affects the bands, obviously. It affects the restaurants that are around the clubs, the people who go out to eat and try to, have dinner before a show. So there's a lot of people all in this together, and I'm hoping that, a positive does come out of this, and they do, give you guys some help, whether it's on your end, the musician, or whether it's on the club side.
Yeah, I mean, there are some positives to this. I mean, it's one of the easiest things I've ever been asked to do for my country is to sit home and watch Netflix. It's not like I got to go fight in Afghanistan or some shit like that. So as far as that goes, it's an easy sacrifice to make, but it's hard on the long term. The career, the whole idea of what you do for a living is in jeopardy all of a sudden. And yeah, there's a big domino effect. You're right. All these other people are affected also by the industry. There's roadies and sound men and lighting guys and bouncers and bartenders and club owners. The whole thing, it's a big trickle down, which it's a major deal.
Getting back to the new album, like I just said, and like you agreed, is that the music, the quality of music that Supersuckers has been putting out over the last several albums has been great. Do you guys try to change up the creative process when you're doing something, when you're recording a new album, or is it, if it's not broke, don't fix it?
No, it's pretty much the same. It's been the same for years for me. I do most of my songwriting on the road, in the backstages and the crappy hotel rooms that we stay in. I have a little acoustic guitar I bring with me, and I just make up all the songs on the acoustic guitar, and I show them to the guitar player right then and there, and we start building the blocks of what the song's going to look like. And then then before we go into the studio, we take a week and get all the songs dialed up exactly like we want them, so that when we're in the studio, we're able to just knock it out. It's basically like just checking off boxes. Okay, now this has to get done. Now this has to get done. Now we got to do this part. And, when we're doing the vocals and sometimes when we're doing the lead guitar, there's some new discoveries that happen. And that's why being in the studio is like my favorite thing to do in the world. So, it's the funnest part of my job is to make the music and to hear it come out. And, I will literally listen to it 100 times in a row before I am ready to stamp it done.
I also imagine too, you've got to hear what you envision in your head, what you hear in your head. Then you got to work it out in the studio. So that's can be a difficult process. But I also imagine too, with you guys playing together for so long, the three of you guys, it's become easier with every album.
Yeah, it is. It's become way easier. And working with the three guys that I have now, or the other two guys rather, it's the band is so much fun that I haven't had the urge to do a solo record since the last one, which came out 7 years ago now. So it's been a great run with these guys, and I love the band so much, and I literally cannot wait till we get to play together again.
Do you attribute the quality of music that you guys are doing now with the synergy of the three of you, with the constant playing and the constant touring that you guys do?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're very tight. We know exactly what each other needs to do, and we pretty much know what the guy's going to do before he does it. And you just have these expectations that are always met. There's never that struggle of expectation versus reality. It's always I know exactly how I'm going to sing a song and what it's going to sound like at the end, and I'm always satisfied with it now. So it's very rewarding right now to work with these guys.
When you do play the music live, that's brand new, that you've just produced and you just put out, I imagine there's a certain sense of vulnerability for you when you play it, because you want your fans to connect with it and you want your fans to enjoy it. What is that process like for you? Is putting the new music on, hopefully people absorb it the way you want it?
Yeah, it's weird at first because, you're playing new songs and you're kind of seeing the heads kind of slowly start to nod. And then by the end of it, the hands go up and, they're throwing the fists in the air. But, at first there is a apprehension, of course, because, the people aren't there to hear new songs. They're there to hear the old ones that they already love. And you have to realize that, and you have to acknowledge that and play some of those old songs. But for as an artist, you have to grow and you have to do new stuff. So otherwise, you're an oldies machine out there just churning out the hits, of which we haven't had any. So that's a whole ugly ball game to get into. If we're just out there churning out the songs that people want to hear every night, that would be a pretty empty experience.
It's interesting because I read an article with Butch Walker, who I'm a big fan of, and he's obviously this big producer in the music industry, but he's also got his solo stuff too, and he's been in Marvelous 3, he's been in some other bands too as well, but he was talking about how fans get on social media and they're like, well, why don't you play your hits, when we come see you? And he's like, I don't have any hits, like I don't have any like songs that were on the, the top 40 or on the radio. So he's free to pretty much play whatever he wants. Of course, like Supersuckers, he wants to play songs that are familiar and he'll keep those songs in the set. But yeah, I mean, when you don't have the hits like someone else who's this big gigantic act, you probably have more freedom to enjoy and not let it get stale, because as people have said before, in order to be a rock star, you've got to have a pretty high tolerance for repetition.
Yeah, for sure, because you're doing the same thing pretty much every night. But if I were to go to a Butch Walker show and he didn't play Hot Girls in Good Mood, I'd be really bummed.
I would too.
That's a great song. And that's kind of really almost the only song I know by him. But, it's so good. There's an expectation. If we don't play Born with a Tail, there's people going to be bummed. If we don't play Creepy Jackalope Eye every night, somebody's leaving disappointed, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes, I don't care to disappoint. I don't mind, and sometimes, in life you're going to be disappointed, dude. You're just going to have to live with it.
I've always gone to a Supersucker show not expecting to hear the songs that I want, but I always go expecting to have a good time. And all the songs that you guys play, you rock out to, you have a good time. Like you said, you put your fists in the air, your head starts to bob, you're having a good time. So yeah, there's a few songs that I wish you guys would play, but I've never felt dissatisfied going to a Supersucker show.
Right, yeah. Every night at the end of the show, someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, why didn't you play such and such or so and so?" I'm like, "Well, we can't play for 4 hours and play every song. So, we're not Bruce Springsteen. We don't have all these songs. We could theoretically play for 4 hours, but nobody wants to sit through that. Not even Cheap Trick plays for 4 hours."
It's true, and when you guys do play, it's like the Van Halen that we talked about. It's an event. It's a good time. When you go to a Supersucker show, you're going to have a blast. You're going to have a good time, and that's what it's really all about.
That's the goal.
Well, Eddie, it's been a blast talking with you about Supersuckers and the current situation that's going on. I'm really appreciative of you doing this. I've been a huge fan of you guys. I hope to see you guys again soon. It's kind of weird going through 2020 without seeing the Supersuckers. I just hope that something positive comes out of all this mess and, we're able to continue on with somewhat of a normal that we're used to.
Yeah, me too, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you still keeping us alive out there in some way.
Well, Eddie, thank you very much. Once again, everybody, this is Jay Scott. This is the Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Stay healthy, everybody, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.